trải nghiệm AI ngay trong các ứng dụng bạn yêu thích. Dùng Gemini để tạo bản nháp và tinh chỉnh nội dung, đồng thời sử dụng Gemini Advanced để khai thác AI thế hệ mới của Google với giá 489.000 cho một tháng. When Cassandra and Eric Nelson first moved into the quiet suburban haven of Magnolia Crest, they believed they had found the perfect place to raise their two children. The wide streets were lined with immaculate lawns and ornate mailboxes, each house painted in subdued pastel tones, as per the local homeowners association. Neighbors often exchanged polite waves, and the community boasted holiday parades and yard sales that brought families together. On the surface, Magnolia Crest seemed warm and inclusive. Beneath the polished exterior, however, strict rules governed almost every aspect of daily life, from the height of hedges to the color of shutters. The HOA prided itself on maintaining uniformity, and by extension, property values. It was this unyielding environment that eventually collided with the Nelson family's unique challenge. Their 8-year-old daughter, Mariah, who had been born with a congenital foot condition requiring a specialized brace. After surgeries and months of physical therapy, Mariah's doctors prescribed a custom foot brace designed to stabilize her lower leg as she walked. It had supportive rods, adjustable straps, and a glossy finish that made it stand out. Each evening, Mariah took off the brace, leaving on the porch or inside the front door to air out. Because of her sensitivity to certain cleaning chemicals, the family had found that letting it ventilate on the covered porch prevented skin irritation the next day. At first, no one seemed to mind the child's foot brace. The Nelsons themselves had cleared the arrangement with a sympathetic neighbor on the HOA board, Mindy Braun, who believed a child's medical device shouldn't be cause for complaint. Yet one particular resident took issue from the start, Veronica Dawson. Veronica, a middle-aged woman who wore crisp cardigans and carried a perpetual scowl, was an outspoken member of the HOA. Privately known among irritated neighbors as Karen, she had a reputation for aggressive enforcement of the slightest infractions. Whether it was a garden gnome that wasn't on the approved ornament list or a car parked an inch too far from the curb, Veronica pounced on every detail. To her, Mariah's foot brace was no exception. She spotted it resting by the porch and felt an immediate surge of disapproval. It looked industrial, strange, and out of place in the neat facade of Magnolia Crest. For the first few weeks, Veronica merely watched from a distance, making mental notes. She'd seen the brace with its gleaming rods propped on a small outdoor stool, sometimes with a pair of child's sneakers next to it. The sight rankled her. She began scouring the HOA guidelines, searching for anything she could interpret to forbid medical equipment left in common view. Though she found no direct clause, Veronica was not easily deterred. She believed the device marred the neighborhood's aesthetic. Blissfully unaware of her growing resentment, the Nelsons settled into their routine. Mariah adjusted to a life where the brace gave her more mobility, letting her chase after her older brother, Grant, on the lawn, though always with caution. The new neighbors greeted them with courtesy, and the porch provided a convenient place for the brace to air out. Yet a storm was brewing, soon to be unleashed by Veronica's unwavering sense of self-righteousness. Signs of tension emerged gradually. Veronica began making unsolicited remarks whenever she passed by the Nelsons' porch. She would catch Eric bringing groceries from the car and comment, "Oh, that contraption is still out here," giving a disapproving sniff. Or she would stare pointedly at the brace, arms folded, as Mariah played nearby. "You might want to store that thing inside," Veronica once said to Cassandra while claiming she was out for an evening walk. Cassandra politely explained why they aired it out. The specialized plastic needed ventilation. Veronica responded with a tight-lipped smile, eyes reflecting annoyance. Occasionally, neighbors noticed Veronica photographing the brace, pretending to snap pictures of a passing dog or the landscaping, but clearly angling her phone toward the porch. She compiled these photos in a personal folder she labeled HOA violations, though in truth, the brace was not violating any explicit rule. Veronica's plan was to gather enough evidence to mount a case for forced removal of unsightly objects. Meanwhile, Mariah's comfort improved day by day. Although wearing the brace for hours made her foot sweaty and sore, her steps grew steadier with each therapy session. She beamed with pride whenever her father praised her resilience. The brace, despite its awkward appearance, symbolized hope for a more active childhood. One afternoon, Mariah was reading on the porch swing, her brace off for the moment. Veronica strolled by with her small dog, a yappy terrier named Waffles. The dog suddenly growled at the foot brace resting on a small bench. Veronica glared at it, then at Mariah. "Your gear, Spooks my pet," she snapped. Confused, Mariah placed a hand on the brace, protectively. "It can't hurt anyone," she said softly, though her voice trembled. She was only 8, uncertain how to handle an adult's hostility. Veronica huffed and marched off, Waffles pulling at the leash. An uneasy feeling crept over Mariah, as though she'd glimpsed a deeper malice behind the neighbor's scowl. Cassandra found her daughter upset later, tears brimming. She said it scared her dog, Mariah whispered. Cassandra reassured her. "The brace is your helper, sweetheart. You have every right to keep it. Don't worry about Mrs. Dawson." But a flicker of concern crossed Cassandra's own eyes. She sensed that Veronica's disapproval might escalate. Indeed, Veronica's next step was to file a complaint with the HOA board. The email she wrote was laced with dramatic language. A menacing mechanical device is repeatedly left on a porch in plain sight. It frightens pets and undermines the neighborhood's visual harmony. The board's response was guarded. Certain members like Mindy Braun saw no issue. They politely informed Veronica that medical equipment was allowed. Furious, Veronica felt the board was too lenient. She vowed to take matters into her own hands. Despite Veronica's subtle harassment, life in Magnolia Crest moved forward. Cassandra and Eric tried to shield Mariah from negativity, focusing on her ongoing therapy. Twice a week, they drove her to a specialized children's clinic where a physical therapist monitored her progress. The foot brace had flexible rods to accommodate her growth, and the design was adjustable. Each day, she gained a little more stamina, walking with fewer wobbles. The brace was not cheap. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs had stretched the family's budget. The rods were made of lightweight, high-tensile materials to provide both stability and a small range of flex. The interior was lined with a hypoallergenic padding that had to be replaced every few months. Nonetheless, the Nelsons never considered it an optional expense. Mariah's mobility and comfort took priority. When asked about Veronica's hostility, Eric tried to reassure Cassandra. "I doubt she'll do anything serious," he said. "Probably just a busybody who can't stand anything different." Cassandra nodded, though an undercurrent of worry remained. She caught glimpses of Veronica's car crawling by their house, or found fresh footprints near the porch as though someone had trespassed. One evening, while collecting the brace from outside, Cassandra thought she smelled faint perfume in the air. Odd, since it was late and no one else was around. Mariah, for her part, tried to remain optimistic. She cherished the partial freedom the brace gave her, which allowed her to walk short distances without crutches. She dreamed of joining a dance class someday, though the therapist suggested waiting until her foot was stronger. In her imaginative mind, the brace was a superhero's tool that overcame obstacles. But every time Veronica glowered at it, Mariah's confidence wavered. The neighbor's scorn felt like a threat to her sense of normalcy. Still, the family pressed on. One bright Saturday, they held a small backyard barbecue and invited neighbors. They extended the invitation to everyone on the block, including Veronica. Most people came, bringing salads and desserts. Veronica, however, declined via curt text. Busy that day. Her absence was a relief to the Nelsons, who enjoyed laughter and conversation without tension. Unbeknownst to them, Veronica's annoyance had reached new heights. She believed the HOA was incompetent for not enforcing a clean, uniform look, and that the Nelsons exploited sympathy by framing the brace as medical necessity. In her mind, the device was simply an eyesore that spooked her dog. She felt a twisted sense of entitlement. If the board wouldn't fix it, she would. Summer nights in Magnolia Crest were serene, with crickets chirping and porch lights glowing softly. On one such evening, the Nelsons were inside finishing dinner. Mariah had removed her brace earlier and placed it neatly on the small porch stool to air out. A light breeze drifted through the screens, carrying a scent of freshly cut grass. Veronica had been stewing all day. Earlier, Waffles had barked at the brace again while walking past the Nelsons' home. She convinced herself that weird gear had to go for good. Fueled by frustration, she waited until darkness fell, hoping to avoid witnesses. Around 10 p.m., she ventured out wearing a dark cardigan. She led Waffles around the block, feigning an innocent stroll. Reaching the Nelsons' porch, she glanced around. No other neighbors were outdoors. With her heart pounding, she crept up the steps, quietly unlatched the gate, and spotted the brace resting upright. Waffles gave a low growl, but Veronica shushed him. She stooped, grabbed the brace's rods, and began forcibly bending them backward. The specialized metals resisted at first, but with enough leverage, one of the rods snapped. Another bent at a jagged angle. Veronica felt a surge of grim satisfaction mixed with panic. She yanked the brace's straps, twisting them until the material tore. Then she placed it back roughly, ensuring it looked obviously damaged. Her sick notion was that the Nelsons would take the hint and never leave it outside again. Waffles whined, sensing the tense atmosphere. Veronica hurried away, adrenaline coursing, her heart hammering in her chest. She rationalized that she'd done the neighborhood a favor. No more eyesore, no more weird contraption. She told herself the child could keep it inside. She felt no remorse. Indeed, she was convinced she was in the right, punishing them for ignoring her advice. At about 10:15 p.m., Cassandra stepped out to retrieve the brace before bed. She found on the stool, rods twisted grotesquely, straps shredded. A muffled scream left her throat. She called for Eric, who rushed over. Mariah, hearing the commotion, peered from behind them, tears forming as she recognized her vital device mangled. Stunned silence enveloped the porch. Who would do this? Cassandra whispered. Eric ran onto the lawn, scanning the darkness, but saw no one. The damage was done. The footbrace was beyond repair. The cost of replacement loomed in their minds, along with the heartbreak of Mariah losing her mobility aid. That moment burned into their memories, shock and despair under the quiet summer sky. Early the next morning, the Nelsons filed a police report about the vandalism. An officer arrived, took photos of the damaged brace, and asked if they had any enemies. Cassandra recalled Veronica's hostility, but hesitated to accuse her without proof. She mentioned the neighbors' repeated complaints, but the officer needed more concrete evidence. Devastated, they explained to Mariah that the brace couldn't be used anymore. The child sobbed. "How will I walk around?" she cried. Cassandra hugged her tightly, promising to get a new one. But both parents knew it might be weeks before insurance authorized a replacement, if they even covered a second device. The custom rods alone cost thousands. The family's tight finances made the thought of immediate out-of-pocket expenses daunting. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Friends and sympathetic neighbors approached the Nelsons, shocked by the cruelty. Many offered emotional support. Some asked if they could donate. Even Mindy Braun from the HOA board visited, outraged that someone would sabotage a child's medical gear. She told the Nelsons she'd bring it up at the next board meeting and push for official condemnation of the act. Meanwhile, Veronica feigned ignorance. When she encountered neighbors discussing the sabotage, she nodded sympathetically, saying, "Such a shame," her face carefully composed. Inside, she felt a twinge of triumph that the brace was gone, until she noticed the community's anger. People talked of starting a fundraiser to help the Nelsons. They mentioned contacting local news about the hateful act. The idea of public attention worried Veronica, though she clung to the belief that no one could tie her to the crime. Mariah stayed home from therapy sessions for a week, unable to walk as freely. Without the brace, she resorted to old crutches, and her foot ached more. Cassandra and Eric scrambled to contact their insurance, exploring every option. The timeline for a new custom brace looked long. In the meantime, Mariah's confidence waned, her progress threatened by the forced regression. Eric confided in a neighbor, Cal Robinson, about their frustration. "Who would do this to a child?" he said, voice trembling with anger. Cal put a reassuring hand on Eric's shoulder. "We'll figure something out. This can't stand." That evening, a small group of neighbors convened in the Nelsons' living room, discussing ways to raise money for a new brace. Some suggested a GoFundMe page. Others proposed a block party fundraiser. Determination buzzed among them. They refused to let such cruelty go unanswered. In her bedroom, Mariah scrolled through pictures of her old therapy achievements on a tablet, tears slipping down her cheeks. She yearned for the day she could walk with minimal pain again. A deep sense of betrayal gnawed at her. She'd done nothing wrong. Why would someone target her lifeline? An 8-year-old should never wrestle with such questions. Yet the harsh reality confronted her. Hatred or ignorance sometimes led adults to do unthinkable things. As the days passed, the neighborhood rallied around the Nelsons in a touching show of support. A group of residents, spearheaded by Mindy Braun and Cal Robinson, launched a crowdfunding campaign titled Help Mariah Walk Again, Replace Her Footbrace. Within 48 hours, donations poured in from neighbors, family friends, and even strangers who heard about the tragedy. The story spread via social media, local Nextdoor apps, and word of mouth. Within a week, they had raised enough to buy a brand new custom brace, plus some extra for any needed adjustments. Overwhelmed by gratitude, Cassandra posted updates thanking everyone. "Your kindness means the world to us," she wrote. She also reassured them that any leftover funds would go toward Mariah's ongoing therapy or donated to a children's prosthetics charity. The generosity stood in stark contrast to the hateful act that had sparked it. Where one person had sought to sabotage, the community responded with love and unity. Mariah beamed when she learned she'd soon receive a new brace, potentially an even better one with improved materials. Her tears of sadness shifted to tears of relief. "They care," she told her mom, amazement shining in her eyes. Cassandra nodded, hugging her daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, they do." The sense of being singled out by cruelty, now balanced by a wave of compassion, gave the Nelsons renewed faith in their neighbors. Yet behind the scenes, Veronica fumed. The family's tragedy had ironically elevated them as local heroes. The once ugly contraption was now recognized as a critical medical device, and the sabotage was widely condemned. She tried to appear sympathetic, even quietly donated a small amount to the fundraiser from an anonymous account in hopes of deflecting suspicion. But her resentment deepened. She believed the Nelsons were exploiting the situation for attention, ignoring how her own misdeed had triggered it. Meanwhile, the HOA scheduled an emergency meeting to address the vandalism of a medical device within the community's boundaries. Mindy Braun proposed new guidelines that would strictly forbid interfering with any assistive or medical equipment on private property. Violators would face hefty fines and possible legal action. The board expected unanimous agreement, though they anticipated pushback from certain corners, particularly from one Karen. The day of the emergency HOA meeting arrived, the tension palpable. Residents packed the community center, eager to see how the association would respond to the sabotage of Mariah's footbrace. The typical hush of these gatherings was replaced by a buzz of emotion. Many wore expressions of anger or concern. Some even carried signs reading, "Protect our kids, protect their devices." At the front table, the board members sat with serious faces. Mindy Braun introduced the main agenda item, proposed protective measures for medical devices. She explained that after the shocking vandalism of a child's footbrace, it was vital to enshrine explicit protections in the HOA regulations, ensuring no one ever again tampered with essential equipment. The proposal included steep fines, mandatory restitution, and possible legal referral for any infraction. Heads nodded throughout the room. The measure seemed moral and necessary. Then Veronica Dawson stood, clearing her throat. Dressed in a tailored blazer, she clutched her notes with rigid fingers. "While I sympathize with the child's needs," she began, "I worry this new rule may open the door to unsightly items on porches. We must balance empathy with preserving the aesthetic that drew us here. A murmur of disapproval rose among attendees. One neighbor, a mother of a child with diabetes, shouted, "You'd rather keep up appearances than protect medical devices? Shame on you," another retorted. "It's not unsightly. It's essential for health. Have you no conscience?" Veronica's jaw tightened. She tried to spin a story about how loose rods or contraptions might pose dangers to pets or children. She even insisted there should be restrictions on visibility, like requiring owners to store devices indoors. The crowd responded with exasperation. Mindy stepped in, voice firm. "We will not punish a child or any individual with special needs by making them hide crucial equipment. This measure is about safety and respect." Sensing the crowd's hostility, Veronica ended her protest with a dismissive wave. She sat down, face flushed. The board promptly voted, passing the protective measure with overwhelming support. A wave of applause broke out, people cheering. Some turned to whisper about Veronica's insensitivity. Mindy hammered the gavel, finalizing the resolution. The new rule took immediate effect. Tampering with medical or assistive equipment in Magnolia Crest was now strictly prohibited, with severe penalties attached. Outside, Cassandra and Eric stood with neighbors, hearts lighter knowing the community had spoken decisively. Mariah was at home with a babysitter, but they couldn't wait to share the news. No one would dare sabotage her brace again without facing serious repercussions. In that moment, the hateful act had been transformed into a watershed moment for the entire subdivision. Despite the new regulations, no official suspect had been named for the vandalism. The police lacked evidence, and the neighbors, though suspicious, had not pinned it conclusively on Veronica. She continued her charade of innocence, even expressing mild support for the new rule once it passed, claiming, "I guess we all want to protect the vulnerable, just with some boundaries." The Nelsons, in their hearts, suspected Veronica was involved, but they had neither proof nor the bandwidth to pursue a personal vendetta. Their focus turned to obtaining Mariah's new brace. Thanks to the fundraiser, they scheduled an appointment with the specialized orthotics manufacturer. The wait felt long, 2 to 3 weeks for a custom mold, but it was a vast improvement over months of insurance bureaucracy. The new design promised upgraded rods and better ventilation, possibly preventing the odor issues that forced them to keep it outdoors. Meanwhile, Veronica's dog Waffles continued to bark whenever passing the Nelsons' porch, even though the sabotage had left no brace outside to spook him. Some neighbors joked that Waffles sensed guilt emanating from his owner. Indeed, cracks in Veronica's composure emerged. She occasionally lost her temper at small things, like the mail carrier leaving a package askew. Once, she snapped at a child biking too close to her driveway. People whispered that she was unraveling under the weight of her own wrongdoing. One evening, Mindy Braun visited the Nelsons to drop off some get-well balloons for Mariah, who had sprained her wrists slightly from overusing her crutches. As they chatted, Mindy confided in Cassandra that certain board members strongly suspected Veronica was behind the brace vandalism. "She's the only one who complained about it," Mindy said, "and her dog is the only one we ever heard about being spooked. But we can't publicly accuse her." Cassandra nodded, frustration flickering in her eyes. "What if she tries something else? The new rules are great, but it won't undo the cost or trauma for Mariah." Mindy squeezed her hand, promising vigilance. The conversation ended with a shared sense of resolution. The community would watch out for each other, refusing to let bigotry or ignorance harm a child again. At last, the day came for Mariah's fitting of the new foot brace. The orthotics clinic welcomed her with gentle smiles. A technician carefully measured her foot and calf, using advanced scanning technology to ensure a perfect fit. Mariah's eyes lit up when they showed her color options. She chose a lavender hue with subtle sparkles, something that felt more like her personality than the old plain design. The cost, though steep, was fully covered by the fundraiser. The orthotics company even offered a small discount upon hearing the story, touched by the community's outpouring of support. Cassandra and Eric stood by, tears in their eyes as Mariah tested the first sample. She wobbled at first, then took a few cautious steps. The new rods were lighter, yet sturdier, providing improved alignment. Mariah grinned wide. "It feels good," she signed, lacking words to convey her relief. Over the next week, they visited the clinic for small adjustments. Each time, Mariah grew more comfortable. Her physical therapist rejoiced that they had replaced the brace so quickly, preventing a backslide in her recovery. By the second week, Mariah was walking with a confidence no one had seen before. She even felt proud of the lavender sparkles, calling it her magic brace. When they returned to Magnolia Crest with a new brace, neighbors cheered from their porches. Some had balloons or signs welcoming Mariah home with her upgraded device. She waved shyly, tears of happiness sparkling in her eyes. The porch stool remained empty. Cassandra and Eric decided to store the new brace inside each evening to be safe. Yet, ironically, the new HOA rule meant they could have left it outside if they wished. The sabotage had left emotional scars, making them err on the side of caution. Veronica, watching from behind her lace curtains, felt a swirl of resentment. Far from being ridiculed, the Nelsons had become local heroes. Mariah's new brace was widely celebrated as a testament to community kindness triumphing over malice. The Karen's quiet sabotage had utterly backfired, inspiring compassion and resulting in stricter rules that protected medical equipment. Observing the joyful scene, she realized her plan had failed spectacularly. With Mariah's new brace in place, the Nelson family found renewed peace. She returned to her therapy sessions and each day walked more steadily. Some days, she even raced her brother Grant across the yard, delighting in a freedom she hadn't felt in months. The hamper of despair that once weighed on them lifted, replaced by a sense of triumph. The mood around their home brightened. However, a nagging question lingered for Eric and Cassandra. Should they press further to identify the culprit? The police case remained open but stagnant. Without security cameras or eyewitnesses, detectives had little to go on. The brace had no usable fingerprints. Word on the street pinned blame on Veronica, but gossip wasn't evidence. Cassandra toyed with the idea of installing a discreet camera on the porch just in case, but she also wanted to move on. Dwelling on the vandal might overshadow the progress Mariah was making. Eric agreed, though part of him burned for justice. Who knows if she'll do something else? He worried. Cassandra reminded him that the new HOA rules posed a heavy penalty for repeat offenses. Even if Veronica tried again, she'd risk massive fines and public censure. Meanwhile, the rest of Magnolia Crest moved forward too. The board finalized documents stating that medical or assistive devices on private property were exempt from most visible item restrictions. Families took comfort in the clarity. Residents commended Mindy Braun for championing the cause. Some even suggested the board consider a new post for her, praising her empathy and leadership. Veronica, feeling the shift in power, toned down her usual zeal for rule enforcement. She avoided eye contact with the Nelsons, rarely walked near their house. People teased that she must be lying low. The once omnipresent Karen was becoming a background figure, overshadowed by the wave of positivity the community displayed. In a private moment, Cassandra wrote a heartfelt letter to the donors who contributed to Mariah's brace. She detailed how the new device had changed her daughter's life, how the family refused to be defined by hatred. Eric posted the letter on the neighborhood's online forum. It gathered dozens of supportive comments, each a small reminder that love outweighed cruelty. Over the next month, Magnolia Crest blossomed with a new sense of unity. Families who once only exchanged nods began hosting block parties. A Neighbors Helping Neighbors group emerged, offering to mow lawns or bring meals to anyone in crisis. The sabotage incident, though tragic, had awakened a communal desire to show solidarity against any form of bigotry or malice. Local media caught wind of the Footbrace saga. A small local paper published a feel-good piece. Vandalism sparks wave of compassion in Magnolia Crest. The story praised the neighborhood's swift response, highlighting the new HOA rule that protected medical devices. Some neighbors worried about overshadowing Mariah's privacy, but Cassandra and Eric consented to an interview, wanting to share how adversity had led to positive change. In the interview, Cassandra said, "We never expected someone to damage our daughter's brace," her lifeline. But the outpouring of kindness that followed was overwhelming. Our neighbors, near and far, gave us hope. And the HOA's new protective measure is a major step forward for families dealing with medical challenges. The article garnered positive feedback, reinforcing the notion that one hateful act could yield a powerful message of empathy. Veronica read the piece, a bitter taste in her mouth. She recognized her own hidden cameo in the story, the unnamed saboteur who tried to erase a child's weird gear. Yet every line reaffirmed she had lost. Instead of removing the brace from view, she had multiplied support for it. Each time Waffles barked, it served as a reminder of how her misguided deed had led to enhanced rules that she herself disliked. On a warm weekend, the block hosted a yard sale that doubled as a mini celebration for Mariah's improved mobility. Balloons and banners welcomed visitors, and the event raised additional donations for other local kids needing medical devices. Cassandra and Eric manned a table with leftover children's clothes, smiling at the sense of unity. Mariah tottered around, her sparkly lavender brace catching sunlight. Whenever curious kids asked about it, she eagerly explained. The brace had become less of a stigma, more of a badge of resilience. Standing on the sidelines, Veronica quietly watched. She'd come to see if the yard sale followed HOA guidelines. She saw tables placed at regulation distances from the curb, so she had no complaint. Yet as she witnessed the cheerful interactions and spied Mariah happily demonstrating how the brace worked, Veronica felt a pang of regret, though it mingled with stubborn pride. She would never publicly admit wrongdoing, but deep inside, she couldn't deny the outcome. The child's weird gear had become a symbol of unity in the very place she tried to enforce uniformity. One late afternoon, as the sun slanted across the immaculate lawns, Mariah walked outside to water a small potted flower she'd recently planted. The brace had become so comfortable she barely limped. Suddenly, she found Veronica standing on the sidewalk, Waffles on a leash. Their eyes met briefly. Mariah froze, uncertain whether to turn away. For a moment, Veronica looked torn. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Silence stretched. Finally, Mariah gave a small wave. She was, after all, a polite child. Veronica cleared her throat. You're walking better, she managed. Mariah nodded. Yes, the new brace is good. Veronica said nothing for a second. Then she forced out the words, "Well, that's nice." Her gaze fell to the lavender contraption hugging Mariah's lower leg. A swirl of emotion flickered across her face. Guilt, shame, perhaps resentment. She gave a curt nod, turned on her heel, and retreated with Waffles. The entire interaction lasted less than a minute, but felt fraught with unspoken tension. Mariah told her mother about it later, describing how Veronica seemed uneasy. Cassandra sighed. She might know what she did was wrong, honey, but some adults can't apologize. Mariah frowned. But an apology would be nice. Cassandra hugged her gently, explaining that not everyone had the courage to admit fault. Still, a small part of her was relieved that Veronica at least spoke to Mariah civilly. Maybe that signaled the end of open hostility. Across the street, Veronica paced in her living room, scolding herself. She had felt an impulse to offer an apology, a phrase like, "I'm sorry about your brace." But her pride stopped her. She feared that any admission would result in condemnation, possibly legal trouble. The words stuck in her throat, replaced by a feeble pleasantry. She recognized the child's innocence, but her own fear overshadowed any chance of redemption. Shaking her head, she convinced herself it was best to stay silent. Weeks flowed into months. Mariah grew stronger, occasionally joining her school's adaptive sports activities. The HOA enforced the new rule regarding medical equipment. It was posted in newsletters, hammered home in monthly bulletins. Though some residents grumbled about yet another regulation, the majority applauded the policy as moral and necessary. No further incidents of sabotage occurred. The Nelsons occasionally left the new brace on the porch for short intervals, especially if Mariah's foot needed extra ventilation on hot days. They felt safer knowing official protections were in place. A few neighbors took extra steps to ensure no one tampered with it. Some walked by on purpose to keep watch, ready to intervene if they saw suspicious activity. This quiet vigilance spoke volumes about the community's transformation. The event had forged bonds among families once merely polite acquaintances. As for Veronica, her influence waned. She rarely attended board meetings. She withdrew from her usual patrols for HOA violations. Some neighbors commented that her posture seemed deflated, as though the wind had gone out of her sails. She remained polite but distant, limiting contact to curt nods. The air around her felt heavy with unspoken regrets. One day, a rumor spread that Veronica was considering moving away, citing lack of appreciation for proper standards. Others guessed she was embarrassed, wanting a fresh start in a place where no one knew her actions. The possibility of her departure elicited mixed reactions: pity from some who saw a lonely figure, relief from others who resented her unyielding meddling. Meanwhile, the philanthropic spirit that rose from Mariah's ordeal continued. Each quarter, the block arranged a new charitable initiative: clothing drives, toy donations, or hamper collections for local hospitals. Mariah's story served as a gentle reminder that a single child's plight could rally a whole neighborhood. Out of cruelty grew compassion. Out of adversity blossomed empathy. Seeing Mariah's confidence now, walking with minimal assistance, practicing small dance steps in the yard, Cassandra and Eric felt immense pride. They recalled the night they found the brace destroyed, the heartbreak in their daughter's eyes. It seemed like a distant memory compared to the present resilience and communal warmth. Eventually, Veronica put her house on the market. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn one early autumn morning. A hush spread through the neighborhood. Some responded with subdued relief, others with quiet satisfaction. The open house attracted a few potential buyers. By winter, a new family had submitted an offer. Veronica accepted, finalizing her plans to leave Magnolia Crest. On her last day, she quietly loaded boxes into a moving truck, Waffles yapping at her heels. She avoided big farewells, sneaking out in the early hours to dodge curious neighbors. Only Mindy Braun witnessed her departure from across the street, noticing Veronica pause for one final glance at the Nelsons' house. A fleeting expression of remorse crossed her features. Then she turned away, climbing into her car. Moments later, she was gone. That afternoon, Mindy visited the Nelsons to let them know Veronica's left. She just drove off. Cassandra exhaled. "That chapter's over then," she murmured. Though they never received an apology, they felt a measure of closure. They had survived the worst of her interference. The hateful act that destroyed Mariah's brace had inadvertently galvanized the community to adopt stronger, more empathetic rules. Ultimately, Veronica's sabotage had achieved the opposite of her goal. Medical devices now enjoyed even greater acceptance and protection. In the weeks following Veronica's departure, the new family moved into her old home. They brought young children who quickly befriended Grant and Mariah. The dynamic on the street grew lively with playdates and shared activities. The gloom that once seeped from Veronica's presence dissipated, replaced by the laughter of children racing bikes along the sidewalk. The day the new family arrived, the mother introduced herself as Alicia and asked about the Footbrace rule. "We heard something about protective measures for assistive devices." Cassandra explained the backstory, and Alicia responded with genuine admiration. "What a thoughtful community. My nephew has a hearing aid. Glad to know we're in a place that cares about accessibility." This chance comment reaffirmed to the Nelsons that Magnolia Crest had, indeed, changed for the better. Seasons shifted, leaves fell, and a year passed since the sabotage. Mariah blossomed into a confident 9-year-old, more active than ever. Her physical therapist marveled at her progress. Occasionally, she switched to a newer foot brace design as she grew, each one reflecting her personality: silver stripes, floral prints, or subtle sparkles. No one in Magnolia Crest questioned it anymore. The porch stool, once a focal point of conflict, now simply held Mariah's brace on the rare occasions it needed airing. Neighbors who walked by greeted it like an old friend. The final result of Veronica's cruelty was a community more tightly knit, more aware of diverse needs. The new HOA rule remained on the books, an enduring legacy of a wrongdoing turned impetus for improvement. Families felt safer leaving wheelchairs, braces, or hearing devices outside if needed. The fear of sabotage had vanished, replaced by watchful camaraderie. One crisp afternoon, a local journalist revisited the neighborhood to do a follow-up piece titled, 1 Year Later, Magnolia Crest's Triumph Over Hate. The writer interviewed the Nelsons, capturing Mariah's shining face as she demonstrated a short dance routine in her brace. She even twirled a bit, only wobbling slightly. The community center hosted a small reception, celebrating how far they'd come. A photo of Mariah's old broken brace, along with the new rule documentation, was displayed as a reminder that adversity could be a catalyst for positive change. During the event, Mindy Braun offered a speech. When a medical device was destroyed, we stood together against ignorance. We wrote a new rule, but more importantly, we opened our hearts to each other. Mariah's brace isn't weird or scary. It's a testament to her strength. Let remind us that difference is something to be respected, not feared. Applause thundered, tears in many eyes. At the back of the room, Cassandra and Eric held each other's hands, pride and relief mingling. The memory of Veronica's sabotage was overshadowed by the community's overwhelming kindness. They knew a piece of them would always resent that night of heartbreak, but they also felt gratitude for the love that had surged afterward. That love had quite literally put Mariah back on her feet. In the hush that followed the applause, Mariah stepped forward, gave a small wave, and simply said, "Thank you for helping me walk." Though her voice was soft, the significance echoed in every heart present. The story of Karen and the broken brace had come full circle, culminating not in bitterness, but in a testament to resilience and unity. Nothing could ever truly justify the act of violence done to a child's medical device. But out of that cruelty, Magnolia Crest discovered its unbreakable spirit, forging stronger neighborly bonds and a more compassionate set of rules. In that sense, the Karen who had aimed to rid the porch of weird gear inadvertently strengthened the entire community's resolve to protect the vulnerable among them.